Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 2237. The topic is training, and the title is, How Often Should You Squat, Bench, and Deadlift? I want to talk today in regards to one of my clients. She's incredibly strong, and she recently was asking about the frequency that we squat, bench, and deadlift. She was comparing her programming to some other people's programs and noticed that ours is different. Now, in our discussion, I also showed how it's different in the other direction as well. So she was seeing others who squat, bench, and deadlift more often than she does, and she was wondering if that was going to help her get stronger. Then I showed her people who do it less often than she does, and they have world records. So the frequency in which somebody squat, benches, and deadlifts, it isn't directly related to their degree of success. Meaning the more often you squat, bench, and deadlift, the stronger you're going to be. That's actually counterproductive at a certain level of strength and for certain people. So there isn't really one size fits all approach to how often you should squat, bench, and deadlift. I wanted to discuss today the main factors that I consider when creating programming for clients, so that way you can then decide how often you should squat, bench, and deadlift. Too often, what I see happen is people think more is better. So they want to squat more often, deadlift more often, bench more often. Maybe initially they get an improvement because their technique is going to improve, but eventually it can often and most often leads to CNS stress, joint connective tissue stress. They get mental burnout, they get physical burnout, they get injuries. And usually people, if they squat, bench, and deadlift too often, you don't see them still lifting in 3 to 5 years. They might have a flash in the pan, do an amazing job, set a record or two, and then they just crash and burn. The people that I work with, my goal is to have them be crazy strong right now, but crazy strong for life. I have many competitive elite total powerlifters who have 10 plus year careers in powerlifting because we control the stress. And our goal is long-term success. We're not giving up our long-term in the pursuit of short-term. Now, in the short term, we still want to have progress. So this client, for example, we worked together years and years ago, so 6, 7, 8 years ago, and took a little break. She had a couple kids and some other adventures and stuff we went on, like into bodybuilding and some other things. So we started working together recently. And we did our first meet back working together in December of 2023. I'm going to give you some numbers, but then I'll give you context. So you don't have to remember these numbers. But she squatted 325, benched 175, deadlifted 320. She had an 820-pound total, which at that time gave her an elite total, and a 402-pound DOTS. Now, a DOTS is a way of scoring powerlifters regardless of body weight. So if somebody competes at 160 pounds versus 260 pounds, how can you compare those two athletes? They use a DOTS score. It's based on a formula, right or wrong, that's the way they do it. So we'll move past that. In our most recent meet, which was in December of 2024, so a year later, she squatted 360, which is a 35-pound increase. She benched 205, which is a 30-pound increase, and we deadlifted 320, which was the same, but she had tweaked her hamstring connector at a meet where she tried to do sumo instead of conventional. We tried to change her positions, and it was after a lot of dieting, so we tweaked the hamstring. So when we went into this meet, we wanted to be safe, so we just did a 320. Now, just for more transparency, bigger picture, we've done more than 320 in training. So she did a 325 in training, unpeaked. We were still squatting heavy and doing all of our other things, still doing full accessories. So she has definitely gotten stronger. How much, we don't know yet. We'll see here in a month or two when she does another meet. But the idea is, in just a single year, she has added about 80 pounds to her total. She went from a 402 DOTS to a 422 DOTS, which is a very significant increase. And during that whole year, we were dieting up and down. So she competed as low as 123, as high as up into the 140s. So it's been anything but linear progression. There's been a lot of competitions, a lot of chaos. But that's kind of the fun. That's the nuance of finding where your best weight class is to be most competitive with DOTS. So you can modify someone's DOTS score by getting stronger or by being lighter. So we were playing around with both elements to try to find where is she going to be most competitive. So in a span of a year, adding 80 pounds to her total, improving her DOTS score, and having competed across 4 different weight classes is a very productive year. That is a good year. So when we're talking about should we change the frequency of our squat, bench, and deadlifts, it's not coming from a place of what we were doing wasn't working. It was working very well. She just has the desire to maximize, okay, if that's working, can we get 5% more? Can we get 5% more? What can we do to get 5% more? Even 1%. And I completely understand, and I want that same thing as well. I want us to do as best as we possibly can. Now, the change that we're planning to make with her training frequency, this is going to be fun, but I don't fully agree with it. But we're going to do it anyhow. And part of the reason is I don't want her to question if what we're doing is the best. I want her to see if it's the best. So making the changes to squatting more often and deadlifting more often, which is what she wants to do, I don't think they're going to be beneficial. They're going to cause more CNS damage and more connective tissue stress. They are not going to allow us to progress her strength any more than what we're doing now, and she's going to feel more beat up, more tired. Her training sessions are going to take longer, which can impact quality of life. There's not going to be a positive change to this. However, I want her to be able to see that, not just have to take my word for it and then still underlyingly question whether it's a better approach, because then it kind of erodes the belief in what we're doing, and then I might lose the opportunity to work with her, and I really enjoy working with her. So I want to see the project of her continue, because I know we're not anywhere near how truly strong she could be. So in order to keep her long term, in order to satisfy that what if component, which I would have as if I was the athlete as well, we're going to go ahead and make the change, and I'm going to help mitigate the negative impact of that change as much as I possibly can. But based on my experience working with 3,000 plus clients, all the certifications I have under the world, everything, it tells me it's not a good idea. And I have seen people who do this approach. And again, they get an initial jump because they get a technique proficiency increase. But then the long-term impact is all negative, and eventually they burn out and eventually they quit. I can sit here and name dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of people who I know firsthand. I know their first name, I know their face, I've talked to them, to where when they tried this more is better approach, in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, they don't even go to the gym anymore. But if you take the approach of quality over quantity, those people have 5 plus, 10 plus, 15 plus year careers. So my mom, for example, started lifting weights when she was 47. She is now in her 60s, I think like 66 or something, 65. So it's been over 15 years. Actually, we're probably coming on 20 years. And she has competed in over a dozen powerlifting competitions. She has elite totals in 2 different weight classes, every state record, in all weight classes. I mean, she has done exceptionally well. And she didn't start until she was 47. She's in her 50s and 60s. And I mean, she's squatting almost twice her body weight, deadlifting over twice her body weight. So this isn't weak numbers. This is a strong lady. And she has a 20-year career in this because we mitigate the negative impact on CNS and connective tissue strength and just mental burnout. So the methods that I use have been proven to be short-term and long-term effective. The other method of more is better has been proven to be short-term effective but long-term detrimental. Now, does this mean that my approach is best for everyone? No. Does it mean that the approach of more is better is worse for everyone? No. But in the grand scheme of things, when you look across hundreds and thousands of athletes, there does seem to be a trend. And if I was going to say, okay, what should I do? And I don't have a definitive answer yet, I'm going to lean into the side of the trend that is in my long-term favor. I will tweak and modify and change from there, but that is where I would start. So what I want to do in today's podcast is talk about the pros and cons and the whys of what we would decide in regards to squat, bench, deadlift frequency, so that you can decide for yourself where is a good place to start that is effective and safe, and then you can tweak that as you go. The two main factors, I'm going to give you a third, but the two main factors I look at are technique proficiency and current strength levels. Technique proficiency means how well can the person perform the lift. So when we're looking at squat, bench, and deadlift, do they reach their capacity? Like, is there 1 rep max based on that's actually how strong the muscle tissues are? Or that's the best of their ability of currently expressing their strength. What that means is if they're inconsistent with their technique, maybe they don't have their thoracic spine, their upper back braced properly in squats, so their upper back rounds, their shoulders roll forward, and it creates a weakness in the thoracic spine that changes their hips trying to tuck underneath the bar, and it kind of like screws up their squat. So they're not squatting to the best of their actual muscle tissue strength or physical capacity. They're squatting to the best of what their body can handle when a thoracic spine isn't properly braced. So it's a technique issue. Maybe as they go down, they drift forward into their toes. It creates forward bar momentum. The bar then gets ahead of their midfoot balance line, okay, the thrust line, and it gets over their toes. So then as soon as they start to stand up, their butt is going to lift before their knees extend. This creates a super hinged position. Then they have to good morning the bar back over their midline before they can stand up. That is going to cause them to be limited in the strength expression, meaning they could be stronger and move better weight if they were in a better position. So if maintaining the right position is the problem, then you do want to squat, bench, and deadlift more often. Now, this would be only for the lift that would be the problem. So maybe their squat technique is crap, but they're really good at deadlifting. Well, then don't deadlift more often, just squat more often. My mom is a good example. I didn't mean to use her for this, but this is good, so congratulations, Mom. She's an example where her squat is the one that, like, if we take any time off of it, the technique kind of goes to crap. So we have to squat quite often. Her bench is relatively consistent, so it would be kind of like a medium. Her deadlift is perfect. We have done so many competitions where she didn't even deadlift for like 8 to 10 weeks before the competition, and we just deadlifted 2 or 3 times before the meet, and then she hit a PR. Her squat training progresses her deadlift strength, and her deadlift technique is so proficient we don't even have to deadlift very often, and bam, it just clicks every time. Clicks, boom, PR, 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 PR. So it's awesome. So we actually take the space in training that deadlift would normally take, and we fill it with more squat stuff. So she gets like 2 times the squat-based training, 1 time the bench, and 0 deadlifting because it matches her abilities. So increasing squat, bench, deadlift frequency based on technique proficiency isn't a blanket thing. You don't do it across all 3. You do it with whichever one needs it the most. But that is something to consider is the lower a person's technique proficiency, how well they can express their strength, you are going to need to squat, bench, and deadlift more often. It gives them a chance to fine-tune their technique, learn the way the lift should feel, and then it ingrains that better behavior, those better movement patterns, and then over time they can improve their technique proficiency to what would be considered a normal proficiency, and then you can reevaluate how often you're squat, benching, and deadlifting. Now, the more technique proficient someone is, so the higher they have the ability to be consistent with technique, then the less often you want to do the main lift. Abso-freaking-lutely, 100%. Because it gives more opportunity to isolate and address like weaknesses, like individual muscular weaknesses. So if somebody has weak quadriceps in a squat, you don't want to just keep squatting to build their quadriceps, because you're going to cause a crap ton of CNS stress and a ton of connective tissue stress. You have to blitz through and bury all the strong muscles before the weak muscles truly get maximized. The body naturally uses strong things before it lets the weak things be exposed. So just squat to get better at squat is absolutely stupid advice. Stupid. You want to find out what is holding this lift back the most and then isolate that to truly strengthen it. Now, would you do leg extensions as opposed to front squats? Maybe. I would probably lean more towards front squats because you can actually still practice squat-based technique components, whereas a leg extension does not have really any technique components. So doing front squats has better overall carryover, but I would rather leg extensions than just continue to do back squats all the time. Because even if you were to do a pre-exhaust with leg extensions before back squats, and you pre-weakened that isolative weakness, that'll actually improve your strength over time. So even just something as dumb as adding leg extensions, which isn't dumb, but people are going to see it as dumb, as adding leg extensions before squats is a great idea compared to, let's just squat. So technique proficiency. The less good someone is at technique, then you do need to squat, bench, and deadlift more often. The more good someone is at technique, then the less often you should squat, bench, and deadlift, and it gives you more time to focus on isolative weaknesses. So the weak link in the chain, so to speak. The next thing we look at is current strength levels. The weaker someone is, the more often you would do the big lifts. The stronger someone is, the less often you should do the bigger lifts. Why? Well, the weaker someone is, typically what's going to progress their physical strength, their actual muscle tissue, connective tissue strengths, is going to be heavy weight loads. The heaviest weight load that they can get to is probably going to be the main lift components, like a squat, bench, or deadlift. So for example, you're not going to have somebody who's weak do front squats because it's going to be such a lower weight load that it's questionable whether it's heavy enough to even cause physical adaptation. Whenever they are so weak, you're like, well, why don't we just back squat to just get the heaviest weight on them to improve their overall strength? In that case, yes, then squat does help. You still want to do isolative stuff to address the weaknesses, which you will find, but you can definitely just do squat, bench, deadlift. You can do the big lifts more often, and that would be more appropriate the weaker someone is. But conversely, the stronger someone gets, the more recovery demanding and overall systemic damaging squat, bench, and deadlifts are. Their CNS gets hit harder, their connective tissue gets hit harder, their muscle tissue gets hit harder. The body is more damaged by squat, bench, and deadlifts, and due to an increase in damage, you would then need to reduce the frequency so that way they can actually recover. There are world record powerlifters who only squat twice a month. Yes. For some people, they would have a panic attack if I told them to only squat twice a month because they would say, oh my God, that's not enough. I'm like, how am I going to get any stronger? You don't get stronger at squats by just squatting. There's a million other ways to get stronger at squats. Squatting is a good way to get good at squatting, but if you just want to strengthen the muscles, then you can use a million exercise variations that strengthen the muscles that are incorporated in squats. So for example, you can front squat. Front squats will be a lower weight load, but it's really quad dominant, so it can really bring up somebody's leg strength if their quads are weak. So instead of back squatting to where it wrecks them and beats them up and destroys their hips, their glutes, their lower back, you can have them front squat. It's still going to be stressful, but not anywhere near as stressful. Therefore, you can train more often. The more often you can train, the faster you can get muscle adaptation response because muscles heal faster than the CNS and the connective tissues. So the more frequent I can lift, where muscle-based stress is the maximum limiter, the more frequent I can lift, the faster I can get the muscles to adapt and change. If the muscle adaptation is limited by how fast my connective tissue can recover, that's going to suck. That is going to be absolutely limiting to how strong you can be. And that is unfortunately what happens when somebody's strong and they squat more often, bench more often, deadlift more often, is they now start to limit their muscle tissue progress based on connective tissue recovery, which can take weeks, whereas muscle tissue recovery takes just a couple days. So it is very, very important to recognize the stronger you are, the less often you need to squat, bench, and deadlift in order to get stronger at squat, bench, and deadlift. And then the third factor that isn't as important as the first two, but I still want to include it, is training frequency. Some people I work with, they might only train 2 or 3 times a week. Well, then yes, we're going to squat and or bench deadlift probably every freaking workout. If they're only lifting twice a week, we're probably going to do like a squat and a bench on one of the days, then deadlift and a bench on another day, and then, build in some other accessories around there. Maybe when they get closer to a competition, we might actually have a squat, bench, deadlift day where they mimic like what a meet would be like in one training session. The challenging part with that is the workouts tend to be very long. So you have to be very careful with like scheduling. If you give somebody 3-hour workouts, that probably isn't going to work in with their lifestyle very well. And they're going to feel burdened by the gym. They're going to feel bogged down by the gym, and the gym is limiting other happy factors in life. And they're going to get mental burnout. What I typically find is that 60 to 90 minutes are the best length for workouts. For most people, that is something that can be managed well and still balance other needs and priorities in life. But if you start getting over 90 minutes, you get 2-hour, 3-hour workouts, it is going to most often cause negative emotional and mental impacts, and that causes burnout in the long run. Then the more frequently someone trains, so if they can train 4, 5, or 6 days a week, you definitely do not want to squat, bench, and deadlift very often, because their recovery capacity is being nicked away by all these other training events, and therefore they need to train less often because their recovery is being demanded by all these other activities. A category for this I see is CrossFit athletes and coaches. I work with a lot of CrossFit athletes and coaches to improve their strength. But outside of our strength training, they still want to do the Olympic lifts. They still want to do all the different weird, nuancy, goofy stuff that CrossFit athletes do. But they're like, hey, should I squat twice a week? And I'm like, no, because you're squatting. You would want to squat twice a week, still deadlift once a week. You're also doing power cleans and snatches and all this other craziness. And then they're doing like barbell lunges as part of some kind of like Metcon. And it's like you can't just beat the shit out of your body every 24 hours. So often what's limiting a CrossFit athlete from being stronger is they're doing too damn much too often. It's all the time. Is all the time. They always tell me, I want to squat more, I want to deadlift more, and I'm like, you don't. You want to do the opposite of that. We got to bring down how much you're destroying your posterior chain, how much you're hitting your CNS. And they almost always need to eat more food than what they're actually eating. They overtrain, and then they wonder why they get weaker. It's not from doing not enough. It's because they're doing too much. They're breaking their machine of their body down. It's like you're using a machine 24/7. Then you wonder why it breaks down and runs like crap, right? You have to turn the damn thing off. You have to let it recover. So too often what I see in that regards is when somebody trains high frequency, but they also want to squat, bench, deadlift high, is in CrossFit and endurance-based strength sports. Cool. Now, my preference with balancing these 3 components is to squat once a week, deadlift once a week, and bench twice a week. Is this the only way you can do it? Absolutely not. But it is what I found to be the most effective for most clients. Squat day, we still want to do some hinge-based, deadlift-based accessory. And on deadlift day, we would still do some squat-based accessory. So there's a little bit of an intermix between those days. But if we back squat, barbell back squat on one day, I'm not going to barbell back squat again later in the week. Might I use a front squat or a zombie squat? Sure. I had a client recently do Smith machine front squats, and she freaking loved them. But that was an accessory-based day, and those are weight load limiter selections. You are not going to zombie squat, your back squat 1 rep max. Give it a try. Good luck. But there is an intermix between those days. So although they might squat once a week, they're still repeating squatting mechanics a second time a week. And although they might deadlift once a week, they're still repeating deadlift mechanics another time a week. Okay? Then bench, you can bench twice a day because the eccentric tissue stress and the CNS stress, the connective tissue stress, isn't as damaging as squats and deadlifts are. So therefore, I found that people can bench twice a week. We do 1 heavy and 1 limiter, so 1 underloaded variation. So maybe we'll do a wide grip paused variation on that second day, or a Spoto press. We don't typically do like competition bench twice a week. It's going to be, the second day is going to be some type of weight load limiter variation. Now, I do have clients who squat and deadlift on the same day. So maybe on Monday they'll squat and deadlift, but then by Thursday or Friday, maybe we only just do a full lower body accessory day. There's no main lift on those days. So sometimes they like to have the deadlift after squats because it allows them to better perceive and feel what deadlifting on a competition day is going to be like, because they do have to deadlift after they've already squatted. So it's nice for them to get used to deadlifting when fatigued and tired, because that is what the meet is going to be like. So sometimes that is helpful, or schedule-wise, maybe it works out better for them. Maybe on one day they only have an hour, but the other day they might have 3 hours. So we can kind of modify and change what we do on each day based on the time they have per day. But my general approach for my athletes, and what I would recommend to anyone listening to this, is you want to be strong now, but you also want to be strong in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. More is not always better, especially long term. So again, people who often squat, bench, and deadlift max weight loads multiple times a week, they are going to run into CNS stress, connective tissue stress, acute and chronic injuries, and long-term burnout. It is very, very common, so I would be very cautious if you're going to use that approach. When you control the stress of squat, bench, and deadlift, you get to be strong now, but you also get to be strong for the rest of your life. And that's what I would encourage you to focus on. Okay. If you want any help with programming, I do one-on-one coaching. You can learn more about it on our website, www.brutalirongym.com. I'd write out your nutrition program, training program. We communicate every single week. I do video reviews, nutrition reviews, the whole shebang, everything you want someone to be there for. That is exactly what that service is for. It's only $200 a month. So check it out, sign up, let me know. You can email me at brutalirongym@gmail.com or go to our website, www.brutalirongym.com. If you like the podcast, please share the podcast. The more people we share it with, the more people can help. If you like the podcast, you can consider donating to support the podcast. You can do a donation on the website, or you can buy your supplements from NutriCost.com, which is where I buy mine. You can use the code BrutalIron10 for a 10% discount, and we get a 10% commission on anything you spend. And then if you like the information we share in the podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels. You can find us and follow us on Instagram and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.